Good morning and happy Friday. I'm Lindsay Reiser.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, pandemic plan. President Biden announces sweeping vaccine mandates as the nation struggles with a resurgence of COVID-19. His message to millions of Americans who still haven't gotten vaccinated.
What more is there to wait for? What more do you need to see? We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin.
We'll break down the president's new 6-point strategy, what it will mean to you, and how it could impact the everyday lives of 100 million people. The doctor is in. Dr. Anthony Fauci joins us live on Morning News Now to discuss those new mandates. Plus, we'll get his take on the state of the pandemic in America today and when we might finally see a light at the end of the tunnel. Also this morning, never forget. Remembrance is planned 20 years after the 9/11 attacks. We'll take you to ground zero as America prepares to pay tribute to the victims. Plus, a look at how much has changed since that day. And glam or scam, imposters sliding into those DMs, posing as big brands or influencers to steal your personal information. The warning from the FBI and what you can do to protect yourself.
I feel like the last time I angered with Joe, we had a similar story.
I know,
These scams are just like a dime a dozen.
I know, they really are. Speaking of which, you've anchored with Joe before. You're obviously a familiar face here on News Now, but we've never anchored together.
I know.
So
happy to be
happy
here.
to have you here. A little
Thank
girl
you.
power on this Friday morning, which is exciting. We begin, though, with a new phase of America's pandemic response.
Yeah, President Biden unveiled a new COVID strategy that will require tens of millions more Americans to get vaccinated. And the president had this to say to those who have yet to get the vaccine.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you.
The president said that's why he's taking action. COVID cases are surging. You can see it here on your screen. Deaths are now 5 times higher than just a month ago, despite 3 safe and effective vaccines readily available. The president's plan covers everything from vaccine mandates and booster shots to flying and new ways to protect young children from the virus. We have a team covering everything you need to know about the pandemic and the new mandates coming with the president's plan. So let's go ahead and begin with NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning to you. What does President Biden's plan mean for millions of workers across America and who will now be required to get the vaccine?
In many different industries, Lindsay, we're learning more about the president's plan. We knew he wanted to get the entire federal workforce vaccinated, but now he has signed an executive order mandating it. There won't be an option for testing instead of getting the shots. This is going to apply to contractors as well. So we're talking about millions of those. And then on top of that, 17 million healthcare workers who also will be required to be vaccinated. Anybody essentially who works in a hospital or facility like that now won't have the choice to opt out. And then on top of that, and this was one of the big headlines from his speech, any employer that has more than 100 workers will now have to comply with an emergency Department of Labor rule that is going to say either they have to be vaccinated or submit to weekly testing. So all told, taking that all together, that's going to apply to more than 100 million Americans. And this is really a president who we saw yesterday who's frustrated, he said, with the 80 million Americans who still refuse to get vaccinated. So they're hoping this moves the needle slightly when it comes to these people who still have been on the sidelines and waiting to get these shots.
Yeah, we'll have to see if that's the case. But Monica, what about governors in states that have banned vaccine and mask mandates? How's the president addressing that?
And the White House is already gearing up for legal fights across the board and political ones as well. The president did not name any names, but he wasn't shy about calling out those who he says have been playing pandemic politics. Take a listen to how he framed this aspect yesterday.
Let me be blunt. My plan also takes on elected officials in states that are undermining you and these life-saving actions. Right now, local school officials are trying to keep children safe in a pandemic while their governor picks a fight with them and even threatens their salaries or their jobs. Talk about bullying in schools.
Right now, only about 9 states plus the District of Columbia do require masks for kids in schools. So the president is hoping that by applying this political pressure, more governors may want to enact this or encourage localities to do this. But we already saw a lot of Republican governors really criticize what the president announced yesterday, which again is going to set up this political fight that health experts worry takes away from the major public health concern here, which is trying to really get this Delta surge down, given how transmissible the variant is.
Well, Monica, we've seen this play out at work and schools, and we've also seen it up in the air. I mean, unruly passengers on flights. They don't like the mask mandate, some of them. I mean, some airlines have even moved to ban alcohol sales. We're looking now at video of some of these altercations that we've seen. What's the president's message for people who are doing this, acting out on planes?
This was one of his most impassioned points, Lindsay. The president really not mincing any words, saying that these people need to be prepared to pay if they're going to break the rules. So the TSA is going to double its fines for those who don't mask up. And take a listen to the other warning the president had for anybody who chooses to do this.
The Transportation Safety Administration, the TSA, will double the fines on travelers that refuse to mask. If you break the rules, be prepared to pay. And by the way, show some respect. The anger you see on television toward flight attendants and others doing their job is wrong. It's ugly.
The 6-pronged strategy yesterday really showing, guys, that this touches all industries, transportation, healthcare, big business and beyond. The White House hoping this really just has some impact in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, big news coming out of the White House there. Monica, thanks so much.
Now, the president's plan also includes a mandate for many businesses. We're joined by NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin for more on that. Good morning, Ben. Good to see you. So this mandate is about more than public health. There are also these serious economic implications. So help us understand how COVID and its variants are affecting our economic recovery. First of all, as we see more shutdowns, more people having to wear masks inside, and also how this vaccine mandate might change things as we head into the holiday season, also flu season.
Well, after a hot vax summer, COVID and its variants brought the rain. We saw an explosion of consumer spending June and July. It was sort of like New Year's every day. But by August, Delta was putting a dent. Everything from air travel to restaurants, starting to see a steep pullback in customer demand. We also started to see drops in hiring for some of the most exposed industries, restaurants, leisure, customer service. Big picture, the economy recovering from the pandemic shutdowns is now averaging about 700,000 new jobs a month. But unemployment is still behind pre-pandemic levels. The recovery still continuing. The hope is if everyone gets vaccinated, we can get back on track to a strong economic recovery in time for that busy and bustling holiday season where retailers are already struggling with staffing levels and supply shortages.
Ben, so what do businesses think about this? And, how is it going to work for them? Who's responsible for enforcing the mandate? And also, what's the cost going to be to them? Does the burden of this, of either testing their employees or any of that, fall on them?
This takes the tough call off their hands and levels the playing field. So by and large, the business community response has been favorable, with the Chamber of Commerce supporting the move. Many large companies have already put in these vaccine and testing mandates for some or all employees. They have been requiring employees to show proof of vaccination before re-entering reopened offices, new hires being asked about their vaccination status. Businesses say, they've been wanting to enact these mandates, but they've been concerned about the legal liability and employee backlash, even after OSHA, the Work Safety Agency, clarified rules to allow these vaccine mandates more explicitly. So this mandate gives them the cover and makes everyone play on the same level.
All right, Ben, we'll have to see what happens, especially since a recent poll found that among unvaccinated workers who aren't self-employed, 7 in 10 said they would likely quit if they were forced to get the vaccine. Ben, thank you so much for your reporting this morning.
Los Angeles just became the first major county to require all students 12 years and older to be fully vaccinated by January. The decision, made by the nation's second largest school system, was approved by the Board of Education yesterday. And it prompted some immediate pushback by some parents. LA Interim Superintendent Megan Riley says this new policy will impact about 225,000 students between 6th and 12th grade. So students have until October 3rd to get their first shot, and those who aren't fully vaccinated by the end of winter break will not be allowed in school. According to the Los Angeles County Department of Health, 60.8% of children ages 12 to 15 have gotten at least one dose. That number jumps to 68.3 for kids 16 to 17 years old. The decision to mandate vaccines has been endorsed by several local leaders and the teachers union. We're going to go ahead and bring in NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards for more. So Erica, give us a picture here of what COVID looks like among kids in Los Angeles. How many are becoming infected, and are we seeing it spread in classrooms?
Hey, Lindsay, good morning. I think there's no question that we are, in fact, seeing COVID-19 spread in classrooms. Get this, just in the first 3 weeks of school in Los Angeles County, there were more than 7,700 positive cases of COVID-19 among students and about 1,250 cases among staff. The health department there says the case rate for unvaccinated students is about 484 per 100,000. For vaccinated students, it's just about 51 per 100,000. Now, this is already a school district that requires masks, has enhanced air filtration systems, tests its students and staff every week. This dramatic rise in COVID-19 in this area shows you just how important those vaccines really are. Lindsay?
Well, the COVID vaccine is only available for teens between 12 and 16 under federal emergency use, that emergency use authorization from the FDA. And Pfizer is the only vaccine fully approved by the FDA for teens older than 16. So is this a concern here for parents that might be hesitant, and how are school officials responding to that?
Yeah, some parents have cited that emergency use authorization only as a reason that they are hesitant to get the shots for their kids, although it is widely anticipated that the FDA will, in fact, move forward with full approval for the Pfizer vaccine for ages 12 to 15 in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, school board officials say this is really a non-issue. They say that the benefits far outweigh any risks, and in fact, it is their moral obligation to do whatever they can do to protect those kids under age 12 for whom there is no vaccine yet. Lindsay?
Well, some parents in Los Angeles are challenging this. They say it should be up for them to decide. So do you expect this to end up getting fought out in court? And do you think other cities are kind of watching and waiting what happens here?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that. One parent actually last night asked the school board, can families sue if we get our kid the vaccine and then they have some sort of negative secondary side effects? I think it's safe to assume that there will be some kind of litigation. Lawyers already have pending lawsuits related to the school district's requirements for masks and weekly testing. Meanwhile, there are other school districts around the country already mandating vaccines for certain students, mainly student athletes. Fairfax County in Virginia, Aurora, Colorado, parts of New York, actually the entire state of Hawaii already mandates the vaccines for their student athletes. Lindsay?
All right, Erica Edwards, thanks so much for your reporting. Good to have you. And stay with Morning News now. Coming up later in the hour, Dr. Anthony Fauci will be joining us to talk about the current state of the pandemic, as well as President Biden's new plan.
Now, President Biden is set to visit all 3 9/11 sites to mark the 20th anniversary of the attacks. He will start in New York City at Ground Zero, where the Twin Towers fell. Then he will travel to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 crashed before his final destination in Washington, D.C. Then finally, he will pay respects at the Pentagon Memorial site where the 4th plane went down. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now from Ground Zero in Manhattan. Ron, good morning. Thank you for being with us. So the president will be right there where you're standing or nearby, maybe a little bit below tomorrow. What are preparations like? What's going on down there before his visit and before the ceremony?
Well, the expectation is that this is going to be a huge event. 20 years is a big number, and there is something of a generational shift happening in terms of how this event, how this moment is remembered. Some have described it as a shift from a memory to history, and there's a lot of concern by the families who lost loved ones here about this being forgotten, about them being forgotten, their sacrifices and the sacrifices of first responders. So a lot of emotion we expect here tomorrow. The reading of the names, of course, is the big moment here. It begins at 8:46 with a moment of silence, the moment when the first plane struck the first tower, and it continues for about 4 hours. And every year, listening to those names just brings back so many memories. It just causes so much reflection. This was such a profound moment in history that the repercussions of we're still feeling many, many years. Also, the lead up to this anniversary is perhaps more poignant because of the events in Afghanistan just a couple of weeks ago when 13 U.S. service members were killed, and the war came to a very chaotic and messy ending. So there are a lot of tentacles to this anniversary, a lot of aspects to it. But again, it's basically a moment to remember those who lost their lives, to reflect on the heroism of the first responders who tried to save so many lives. And that's what this is all about. And that's why so many families will be here and so many others to pay their respects and to remember, to mourn, and to grieve, and to mostly reflect about what that all means.
Absolutely. That conversation of never forgetting and how are we doing with remembering is something that's certainly on a lot of people's minds, and we'll have more on that a little bit later in the hour. So what do we know about President Biden's visit tomorrow?
Well, as you said, he's going to make 3 stops. He'll be here, then he'll go into Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and then to the Pentagon, along with the First Lady, Jill Biden. We're not sure what kind of remarks he will make here or at the other stops, but it's significant, of course, that the president is going to do all that. My expectation is that he will not try to make himself the news of the day. Again, the focus is on the families, is on the folks who come here to grieve and to remember those that were lost. And again, the emphasis, I think, from the White House is not to make this a political event. It's a time to bring the nation together. It's a time for unity. It's a time for coming together. And again, because this event is following the end of the Afghan war, there's a lot of, it's especially poignant. And because, again, this is 20 years. 20 years is a long time. And there's a lot of concern from family members who lost loved ones about, again, whether the nation is remembering this. There's a lot of discussion here about how to teach what happened here to current generations who weren't, in many cases, alive when this all happened. And so, but the bottom line, I think, is that 20 years is a huge number. It's a big milestone. And it's a time for the nation to come together to just again reflect on the many aspects of what happened. There's still so many unresolved issues. There are first responders who are still dying of health effects. There are only, I believe it's 40% of the families who have been given some sort of a remain that has been identified. So for many, this is still very present today, as much as it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I think the president was obviously going to be mindful of that. And the nation will be as we gather here tomorrow.
All right. Ron Allen from Ground Zero for us. Thank you so much.
In the wake of 9/11, the federal government mobilized to take on international terror in a bipartisan way. Then President George W. Bush created the Department of Homeland Security, signing the Homeland Security Act of 2002 into law just over a year after the attacks, taking aim at the threats of international terrorism coming back to American soil.
Because terrorists are targeting America, the front of the new war is here in America. Our life changed, and changed in dramatic fashion on September the 11th, 2001. The Homeland Security Act of 2002 takes the next critical steps in defending our country. The continuing threat of terrorism, the threat of mass murder on our own soil, will be met with a unified, effective response.
NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now. So, Julia, good morning to you. You know, in just 20 years here, under 20 years, the Department of Homeland Security has really ballooned to be one of the largest federal agencies. It's got a massive list of responsibilities here. How has the department grown since 2002?
Well, it's grown immensely. They now have more than 230,000 employees, and they are also home to the nation's largest federal law enforcement agency with Customs and Border Protection. A lot of what they have taken on has more to do with immigration now. We see a lot of that kind of being their most visible front. That's what a lot of people associate with DHS. But really, when it was started, it was supposed to be an agency that brought other agencies together so that you didn't have this stovepiping. That was the buzzword back in 2001 2001 and 2002 of intelligence, where they felt that they could have prevented 9/11 if one group of people had just communicated with the other. That's what DHS was brought on to do. But of course, the environment we're living in now is very different, and it's not clear that just bringing different agencies under one roof is necessarily going to be the answer to the threat environment we see today. And that's what I spoke about with the current DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and two former secretaries, Jay Johnson and Michael Chertoff.
Julia, let's dive into that. I mean, you write that the Department of Homeland Security's responsibilities have really shifted from Al-Qaeda to really QAnon now. I mean, how has the agency adapted from tackling these international threats to domestic ones?
Right. So the threat environment has changed. I mean, Mayorkas said that it's not that the foreign threat has necessarily gone away since 9/11. It's just that we have these domestic threats. For a while, like if you look at the Obama administration, there was a fear that overseas jihadi groups could be influencing people in the United States, especially via social media. Now the ideologies don't start overseas. They start here. They start with false information spreading online, things that basically would have started the January 6th insurrection riots. That kind of thing is what DHS is paying attention to now. And it was interesting, Jay Johnson was very critical, and he thinks that the model that was used to start DHS, that very act that President Bush signed then in 2002, is now outdated, that they don't have the tools that they need to go police these threats within the United States, and that's really a job better left to the FBI, because DHS is not in the position to investigate and prosecute Americans. It's not something they were set up to do.
Let's talk about some of the other criticism that they went into with you, mostly about their predecessors here. What do they have to say for the people who came before them?
Well, it's very interesting. Michael Chertoff, who's one of the earliest secretaries, he was just the second. He served from 2005 to 2009, really looked at the Trump administration to say that it undercut DHS, an agency that Chertoff really helped stand up. He said that under the Trump administration, there was such an overemphasis, not only on immigration, but on cruel immigration enforcement policies. He said that they instead turned their eyes away from the domestic violence threat and really went so far as to make things worse on that front, especially with President Trump calling people on both sides good characters, saying that they could be good guys on that front as well. And so they think that Chertoff thinks that that really did not do any favors to DHS, especially as it tries to recreate itself in this day and age to try to be an agency that can combat the threat of domestic violence and domestic violent extremists and try to build trust in communities, because it's become so polarized depending on what political party you're viewing it from.
Certainly. All right, Julia Ainsley, always appreciate reporting. Thanks so much.
It is time now for a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns, good morning to you. Happy Friday.
Hey, happy Friday. And, tropics, we're at the peak of the season, and I keep saying, oh, we're okay. We're in the clear. And then like a little something kind of sneaks up at us. So here's the map, a wide shot. So Hurricane Larry's far off the coast. So we're okay, safe from that. Surfers are going to love Larry because this weekend there's some really big waves on the East Coast. The remnants of Mindy is heading safely out to sea. There's not much left of that. Hurricane Olaf, yes, Olaf, made landfall Cabo San Lucas last night in the Pacific. And then we got that area of interest down there in the Western Caribbean. So the Hurricane Center just had their new update out, and they're saying there's a 70% chance that this could develop into a tropical depression, all right? So then where's it going to head? Well, the Hurricane Center thinks that if it develops, it would develop in the western portions of the Gulf, all the way from this Texas coastline southwards, and then all of that rainfall would then head northwards after that. So let me take you through the forecast for today, right through the weekend. We're fine today in South Texas, no issues whatsoever. It's actually a pretty beautiful map as far as travel goes. Just a few thunderstorms in Florida. The Northeast is as gorgeous as it can be after that rain yesterday. But all the hot conditions are in the middle of the country. Denver is expecting a record high today, 98 degrees. So it's like the peak of the summer still. And as far as the weekend goes, still okay in Texas on Saturday. Just a few storms in the deep south, a few showers in Montana. But the heat's really the story this weekend. It was 111 yesterday in Phoenix for a record high. A little cooler, 106 on Saturday. But Sunday's the day when that tropical rain, whether it's a depression or not, or a tropical storm, you're going to get soaked from Corpus Christi to Brownsville, possibly up towards Houston. We'll have to see if any of that moisture makes it into Louisiana, guys. But besides that, it's a sizzling September summer weekend. So try to find a place to stay cool.
All right, Bill, that's some good news, sort of, at the end there. Better than some rain. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Kinda.
Yeah. All right, and coming up, the nation's top infectious disease expert.
Dr. Anthony Fauci joins us in minutes to talk about where we stand in the fight against COVID-19. That's coming up next on Morning News Now.
Welcome back, and let's stay on the coronavirus with the nation's top infectious disease expert. He says Americans are getting infected with COVID-19 at 10 times the rate needed to end the pandemic. Dr. Anthony Fauci told Axios right now we're still in pandemic mode because we have 160,000 new infections a day. That's not even modestly good control, which means it's a public health threat. Joining us now is Dr. Anthony Fauci, of course, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and chief medical advisor to President Biden. Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's a big morning. We now have this new plan from President Biden that we are grateful to be able to discuss with you. So, of course, the vaccine mandates are going to impact about 80 million Americans. But before these mandates, earlier this summer, the administration had seemed to shy away from mandates, and instead there was this big push on education and outreach on the vaccine. So did that not work? Did it only take us so far?
Well, I think the latter that you just said, it took us only so far. It worked to some extent. We did put and still are putting a big push on making it extremely easy for people to get vaccinated. Having trusted members of the community, trusted messengers to go out and get people to understand why it's important to get vaccinated, to make the vaccines very easily accessible, free, easy, convenient, safe. They work. So we did get a considerable portion of the population vaccinated, but now we have this recalcitrant about 76, 77 million people who are eligible to get vaccinated, who have not yet gotten vaccinated. And that is the reason why we are continuing to be in a significant uptick of infections. As I mentioned, and you put up on the screen, 160,000 new infections per day is not where we want to be. And we've reached a point where we've got to do something different. And that's what the president's speech was about when he spoke about the additional mandates. We hope when those mandates get implemented, it would also trigger a number of people to voluntarily come forward to get vaccinated, because we can end this. We have the capability and the resources to end it. We've just got to get people to step up and get vaccinated.
And Dr. Fauci, President Biden's mandate was not just you have to get vaccinated, full stop. It's also there's this option to have this weekly testing. You have to produce a negative test once a week. Let's say a company has a pretty large population of unvaccinated workers. Is testing once a week really an effective alternative to vaccination in keeping all workers safe? And I mean, for example, it was an option for federal workers, and now that testing opt-out is no longer an option. Is that because it's not good enough? It's not safe enough?
Well, the president was trying to strike a middle ground when you were talking about workers. I mean, the statement that was made that in individual enterprises that have 100 or more people working in that enterprise, that either you get vaccinated or you have regular testing. The optimal thing is just full stop vaccination. But since there's going to be obviously some pushback on that, on people who don't want to lose their jobs, but they really don't want to get vaccinated, the president gave an alternative. However, there isn't that alternative if you are a federal worker in the executive branch. It's vaccination or disciplinary action. So it isn't always, in every case, the option of getting tested. That's not so if you are a federal worker.
Let's talk about vaccine mandates in schools. We're already seeing more children test positive for COVID than any other time in the pandemic, of course, concerning to every parent in this country. I want to ask you about sort of a tale of two cities. In L.A., we now have this vaccine mandate in schools for children who are eligible. Meanwhile, in New York City, our mayor is saying we're not going to do that. What do you think about that? What do you think about mandating vaccine for children who are eligible?
Well, I'm in favor of that, and I'm in favor of what they are doing in Los Angeles. I think people should appreciate that this is not a new concept. This is not unique. There are many situations, vaccines that all of our children, I know my children when they were at that age of going to school, they had to be vaccinated for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, and all the others. So the idea about requiring vaccination to attend school is not new with COVID-19. It's been around for a very long period of time.
Absolutely. One of the other things that came out yesterday, of course, is this mandate for healthcare workers. And along with that came a focus on the statistic of how many healthcare workers are not vaccinated, which is 27%, according to the COVID States Project. How concerned does that make you, not only for the patients of those healthcare workers or someone who's interacting with them, but in terms of vaccine hesitancy? I mean, if someone's nurse, if someone's doctor says they don't trust the vaccine, how can somebody who's being cared for by them trust it?
Well, you make a very good point, and that's why it's particularly disturbing when you see healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and others not getting vaccinated to the extent that you just mentioned. I mean, 20+%, 27% is a very, very high number for people who are involved in the healthcare profession because they set the example for others. So that's one of the reasons why, when it came to hospitals that are associated and come under the rubric of Medicare and Medicaid, that people in those particular places have to get vaccinated. That's part of the president's 6-part plan.
And Dr. Fauci, I want to ask you about flu season, which we're heading into. How concerned are you? I mean, is this going to be a whole twin-demic on our hands, COVID and flu at the same time, especially with last year? I think it seemed to show that wearing masks also helped in terms of the flu, but we're seeing less masks this year. What do you think about flu season?
Well, we were very fortunate last year. It was unfortunate that we had a lot of COVID last year, but one of the things, the positive aspects of it, not only for us here in the United States, but also for people in other hemispheres like Australia. Last year, we had the lowest level of flu in memory, not only for us here in the United States, but our Australian colleagues noted the same thing. And the reason was likely what you just said. People were very careful about the spread of respiratory-borne viruses, wearing masks, avoiding congregate settings, particularly indoors. And what happened is we had the spin-off of that was very, very little flu. This year, we hope that we have the same situation, that we don't get hit with a bad flu season. And that's the reason why we've got to continue to be careful. And even though we're vaccinated, when you are in indoor settings in areas of the country, which is essentially is the entire country, is in a situation where you have a high level of infection, you should be wearing masks even when you are vaccinated if you are indoors.
All right, Dr. Anthony Fauci, in his first live appearance on Morning News Now, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will come back. And I know it's a busy morning for you, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So interesting what he said. At this point, we are at the point where we could control this.
Yes, I know.
It's just a matter
It gives you
of
hope while at the same time feeling confused about how we are, where we are.
Yeah, but also a reminder, flu shot. Flu season.
I know.
You can get it now.
I need to get mine, actually. I keep getting texts from CVS about that.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Well, we're going to have much more still after the break, including the business impact, of course, after the September 11th attacks. Much more ahead. Stay with us. It is a stunning matchup for the U.S. Open Women's Singles Championship this year. 2 teenagers will compete for the title for the first time in more than 20 years. Last night, 18-year-old British tennis star Emma Raducanu became the first qualifier in history to reach the final. So get this, she's ranked 150th in the world. She had to play 3 qualifying matches just to make it to the main tournament. And now she will square off against 19-year-old Leylah Fernandez of Canada tomorrow. Fernandez defeated number 3 seed Naomi Osaka earlier in the tournament and also took down the number 2 seed last night. So the last time, Savannah, that 2 teenagers competed in a major final was 1999. Don't read the prompter. You probably did. Can you guess who won that match?
No, I'm just going to say no. I don't ruin the surprise. You reveal.
Magic of TV. Serena Williams, of course. So.
Of course, the GOAT.
To come.
How cool, though, 2 teenagers. Can you imagine that?
Cannot.
Oh,
So
my
much
gosh.
pressure.
Very cool.
Good luck to both.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Now, before coming to NBC News, Stephanie Ruhle worked for a Wall Street bank in downtown New York City. On 9/11, Stephanie watched with panic as the World Trade Center was attacked, as she knew dozens of people inside. She joins us now live from Ground Zero. Stephanie, good morning. I mean, what is going through your mind as we look back 20 years later as somebody who was there, who saw it with your own eyes and knew people inside?
Savannah, we all have a story. I am here in the financial district, just a couple blocks away from Wall Street. And this is where everything in finance happened. The industry has been transformed since then. But you have to remember, whether it's people in New York City or Pennsylvania or Washington or really anywhere in the country, we all have a 9/11 story and experience, and it's changed all of our lives forever.
20 years ago, I had a job as a junior salesperson at a Wall Street bank working on a trading floor. A football field-sized room crammed with desks and giant TV screens. As soon as the first plane hit, the trading floor, normally so loud, went completely silent. Wall Street's a small community. It wasn't that we knew someone in those buildings. We all knew dozens. The traders I worked with had direct phone lines to brokers in the World Trade Center. Guys next to me telling them what was happening on the TV screens. But after that second plane hit, there was a distinct change. Concern turned to panic. I could hear my coworkers, my bosses, starting to ask, how are you guys going to get out of there? Within hours, the bank sent all of us home. And like so many New Yorkers, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I made a list of everyone I knew inside and frantically started calling friends, families, and eventually hospitals until there was no one left to call, but still names on my list. We had just watched this whole industry get decimated, which made it so painfully strange weeks and months later, because Wall Street markets, they keep moving, but the people we did business with, just no longer there. 20 years ago, there was such a concentration of financial manpower in those two towers. It's called the financial district. Since then, that's not the case. Firms have moved to other parts of the city, to other cities completely. But the memory of the people who worked at those firms lives on. 20 years later, many of their children, now adults, work at those companies, alongside the people who worked with their mothers and fathers.
You know, it's extraordinary. When you think about the financial industry and all of the lives lost, it's changed so much in the last 20 years. And for many people wondering, why was my life spared? Why did I go to work late that day? Why was I the person who went and took my kid to school? And it's amazing to see so many people still in the industry have stayed close to some of their colleagues who lost their lives, families. And it's amazing to see some of their children who are just 5, 6, 7 years old now hold the same jobs their mothers and fathers did at those same firms. It's a community that's very close, that always took care of itself, but because of 9/11, more than ever.
Absolutely. That's also something that we see reflected with our first responders. So many sons and daughters who are now doing the same job that their hero parents died that day doing. It's really amazing to see. Stephanie, we so appreciate your perspective and your reflection for us. Thank you so much. Now, Americans promise to never forget September 11th and the thousands of lives lost. For first responders, the day is impossible to forget. I spoke with a group of survivors, including Greg Hansen, a lieutenant with the FDNY on that day, about what it means to truly remember 9/11 and how we can honor those who are no longer with us. Having seen it and been right in it and knowing you won't forget that, how do you think we as a whole are doing with remembering?
Let's just think about all the tragedies that happen in the world over time. And then let's think about how we remember any of those tragedies. Very few have a memorial significant as this. But if we want to expand that question and learn from the lessons of what happened, learn from the lessons of what that type of tragedy and misery is supposed to teach us, then we have forgotten years ago.
You can see the rest of this interview and a lot more during our special America Remembers. That's airing today at noon Eastern, right here on NBC News Now. I hope you'll join us.
Yeah, and when you talk to people who were there that day and saw terrible things and know people who were lost, and you say, how does it feel 20 years later? A lot of times you hear, well, it does feel more distant now, but then you start to ask questions and the tears come, and it's like it was just yesterday.
Oh,
was that your
goodness.
experience?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, most so, this is a conversation with 4 people with Greg. And I just think, you know, I mean, he described getting out of the North Tower with just minutes to spare before it's collapsing. You don't forget that. Right. And it was so...
Or ever stop questioning why.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, for him, and he apologized, you know, he started crying. And I'm like, oh, please. Like, it's absolutely... Yeah. And then, you know, we all felt that. So... yeah, it's definitely a tough day tomorrow.
Yeah. Looking forward to that interview. Still to come. From a dream vacation to a really big nightmare, tens of thousands of travelers are now having trouble getting refunds for canceled flights during the pandemic.
Yeah, so when we return, what you should know if you're looking to get your money back from an airline. This is Morning News Now.
If you are one of the many Americans still waiting for a refund from an airline for a flight impacted by the pandemic, it may be time to contact the Department of Transportation. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky explains.
More than a year after the pandemic caused massive cuts to air travel, tens of thousands of customers are still trying to get their money back after airlines canceled or rescheduled their flights. A new government report says complaints about ticket refunds skyrocketed in 2020, with more than 100,000 submitted, up 568%. This year, 20,000 more complaints.
This is crazy.
72-year-old Lenore Seck booked her dream trip to Ghana to reunite with a friend she met in the Peace Corps. But when the airline canceled her flight, they only offered a voucher for future travel.
They are very big and I'm very small, so $1,700 means an awful lot to me.
After months of calls and emails, Lenore turned to the Department of Transportation for help, whose website allows travelers to file claims for refunds. Passengers will need to provide flight information, receipts, and records of communication with the airline.
If an airline cancels a flight, they need to pay a refund back. It needs to be a cash refund, and it needs to be a prompt refund. And that hasn't been happening with all the airlines.
The department now has 18 airlines, both foreign and domestic, under investigation for refund practices and has filed a formal complaint against Air Canada for delays in refunds.
And this morning, the DOT is telling NBC at least 9 airlines have already changed their policies, making it clear travelers are entitled to that cash refund instead of just a voucher or a travel credit. Savannah, Lindsay, we'll send it back to you.
Very good to know. I got some credit tied up in a couple different airlines. All right, Morgan, thank you.
All right, now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Let's go ahead and welcome Dominic Chu to the broadcast this morning. Good morning, Dominic.
Good morning, ladies. First of all, let's start with Toyota. It's cutting production by about 300,000 vehicles this year due to the COVID-19 outbreak and the global semiconductor shortage. The automaker is facing difficulties in securing parts amid a rise in COVID cases affecting its suppliers in places like Southeast Asia. The virus pandemic has also boosted demand for chips used in everything from laptops and video game consoles to the dashboard, possibly in your Toyota Prius. And Twitter is launching a new feature, allowing accounts to identify as bots by adding a label to their profile. The company says people want more context and transparency about these types of automated accounts. Twitter gives several examples of so-called good bots, including those accounts that share things like vaccine updates or information about public attractions. Twitter will continue to remove those so-called bad bot accounts it says are violating its policies and rules. And JP Morgan is getting into the restaurant review business. Yes, they are. The bank is buying the Infatuation, a popular website known for its dining recommendations. It also runs an annual food and music festival and then bought Zagat from Google back in 2018. Banks and credit card providers are trying to lock in some affluent consumers interested in dining out and travel. American Express bought restaurant booking app Resy back in 2019 and has since launched exclusive deals for some of its Amex members. Now, Savannah, Lindsay, I don't know about you guys. I may not be one of those so-called affluent people out there, but I certainly like reviews. I want ideas, places to go out, and hopefully when things get back to normal, I'm going to be going out a lot more.
Absolutely.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't check out Infatuation probably once a week.
I love Infatuation. They used to do this really cool thing, too, where you could text live with somebody. My parents are coming. I want a good vibe, not too loud. They'd send you like 3 restaurants that were all amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. All right, very interesting.
Good to know, Dom. Thanks so much.
You got it, guys.
And coming up, too good to be true. Scammers posing as influencers or brands to steal your personal data.
Yeah, and now the FBI is getting involved. So we're going to tell you what you need to know to keep your information safe. That's next on Morning News Now. This is always good advice, but be careful who you follow because they may not be who they say they are. Scammers are now creating knockoffs of social media accounts claiming to be legitimate brands, influencers, even your own friends in order to get your personal information.
And according to the FBI, people have lost hundreds of millions of dollars to these imposter scams. NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen has some tips to keep you safe.
Across social media, offers for deep discounts and giveaways. They appear to come from legit brands. But these accounts are fake, and so are the giveaways.
There was somebody spoofing our account.
Lauren Lakai is the owner of Paso Robles Wineries, a tourism resource for people visiting this region of California, famous for its vineyards.
And had you ever done a sweepstakes before?
Yes, we had. It's really fun to have giveaways for people to possibly win a vacation.
But that fun came to an end once Lauren realized her legitimate Instagram account with over 40,000 followers had been spoofed. An imposter was claiming to be her business.
And they reached out to all these people and said that they had won the contest and that in order to get the prize, they needed to go to a web page and put in their information.
And cybersecurity experts say that's the scam. Crooks take pictures from the real page and create a similar name. Then they reach out to followers of the real page to fish for their financial information. Take a look. The spoofed page looks real, but check out that URL. It's gibberish.
What are these spoofers after? They're after personal information. They want to steal your credit card, your name, your phone number, any information that they can use.
Give us a sense of how big this crime has become.
In 2020, there were over 28,000 complaints related to spoofing, with losses of approximately $216 million.
Emily Kaufman is a travel expert known as the Travel Mom. She promotes a weekly giveaway for a free vacation to her 30,000 followers.
They do this over and over again, sometimes multiple times in the same day.
She says some of her followers have lost money to the scammers. Over the course of our investigation, we found the Travel Mom account was spoofed 16 times on Instagram and 8 times on Facebook. But that's not all we uncovered. We also found spoofed accounts claiming to be popular brands, including Nike, Gap, Ray-Ban, Chanel, Converse, even Kylie Cosmetics.
Even my Instagram was spoofed. This account right here, that's not mine.
So we asked Facebook, which owns Instagram, what it's doing to crack down on these scams.
This is something that we take very, very seriously.
Robert Trainham is the head of public affairs at Facebook.
We have taken down nearly 1.3 billion fake accounts since the beginning of this year.
1.3 billion in 2021 alone?
That's right. And we do this in 3 ways. One, it's artificial intelligence. The second is through human review. And the third is for the consumers that are watching at home is to report suspicious activity.
But as Lori and Emily told us, the reporting doesn't always work.
It can fall on deaf ears, which it did.
What do you say to people who are frustrated? They feel like they are contacting Facebook or Instagram and nothing is done.
Don't give up. We have 35,000 people working on this issue, along with other safety and privacy issues. This is something that's an ongoing issue.
Do you think Facebook and Instagram are doing enough to protect the small businesses, the individuals whose identities are being exploited on your platforms?
Well, we're striving for perfect, but we'll never get there. But this is something that we have invested billions of dollars into.
To protect yourself before accepting a friend request or responding to a direct message, Facebook says compare connections. Who are their friends? Check to see that you're not already connected to them and look at their posts. Are they recent? And if it's a popular company, brand, or celebrity, look for that blue check mark. That means the account has been verified. Actions you can take to stay safe on social media.
Good advice there. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.